Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Evan Vandriel. I'm a naturopath and I focus on the treatment of traumatic brain injuries. And so I wanted to talk today about 3 reasons that people's brains don't heal after a traumatic brain injury. So really what I'm talking about is post-concussive syndrome. So somebody who's been, so after a head injury, about 3 months, they're still not getting better or even getting worse. So the reason that I wanted to talk about this is that I have had a couple concussions in my past, and I didn't really realize it, but I blacked out for a couple of them, and that's not necessarily a requirement for having traumatic brain injury. You don't necessarily need to lose consciousness; it just needs to be shocking enough to the brain that it changes the way that it works, metabolically or neurologically. So yeah, so I had fatigue, I had brain fog. One of the worst things that I had was really severe hip pain, and I didn't figure out what it was until later. But yeah, I was limping around for half of high school. Like I just couldn't put weight on my hip, on my right leg, and there was just this really severe sacroiliac pain. That was one of the worst things that I had. Also, in theory, I knew what a normal bowel movement was, but I couldn't remember a time when I ever had one. So those are the main things that I had: the fatigue, pain, GI disturbances, and it's I didn't really realize how much these things were affecting my life until they weren't. Um, but yeah, it was like I just thought it was kind of normal for people to be kind of just trudging through life with their, with their pain, with their suffering. I mean, I saw it all around me. So, and then I guess one day I was like, you know what, I want to figure this out. I want to dig into it and see if I can get better. And so I was going to a chiropractor, and they would adjust it. It would, this hip specifically, and it would get better, but it would be back by the time I got to the car. So I realized that it was a structural issue, but it wasn't really a structural issue. And then the other thing I went to a naturopath. I tried different meds, but nothing really solved the problem. And so ultimately I decided, you know what, I'm just going to figure this out on my own. And that's when I found naturopathic medicine. So I found the things that were the most profound for me is what I wanted to share in this video. So the first one is this gut-brain connection thing, and it's becoming more and more of a popular idea that the gut affects the brain and vice versa. And so I wanted to talk about it, and really in all seriousness, how big of an impact it can play in the recovery from a brain injury. So after a concussion or traumatic brain injury, within 6 hours, there's a leaky gut created, depending on the severity of the brain injury, but to some degree this is happening whenever there's a head injury. So what happens after concussion is that the metabolic demands that the brain have, like the requirements for oxygen and sugar for metabolism, dramatically rise because the brain's trying to rebalance itself after the injury. And so the body shunts blood to the brain, and this can actually, and away from the gut, and so it actually creates leaky gut within 6 hours. So in this leaky gut, no matter how it happens, it can definitely affect the motility, the way things move through the gut, gastric secretion, so like stomach acid, mucus production, and then also the way the valves function. So there's this ileocecal valve in the small intestine, and its job is to prevent regurgitation of colon contents back into the small intestine. So when this and leaky gut doesn't necessarily just have to be caused by a brain injury, but it's one of the mechanisms. A brain injury is one of the mechanisms that can create leaky gut. So if the gut doesn't heal, or if the gut is inflamed, or there are other factors that are causing intestinal inflammation, this can definitely affect the way that the brain heals. There's a vagus nerve that comes out near the base of the skull, and it's kind of like how the brain coordinates how digestion works, and gastric secretions and motility and things like that. So, but it's a two-way street. So inflammation and infection, whatever it is that's going on in the gut, can affect the brain, but vice versa. So one of the things that I think is important that people sort out when it comes to this when it comes to treating brain injuries is is making sure that the gut is healthy. And so usually the best approach is to remove any offending foods. I mean, the worst in my experience seem to be gluten. I mean, even in the absence of any kind of immunological reaction to gluten or gliadin, so you're not sensitive to it at all, you're not celiac, it still creates a transient, like a leakiness in the gut, and this is due to one of the proteins in the gluten. And then the other one is dairy. It seems like, again, regardless of whether or not people respond immunologically with histamine or are sensitive to dairy, it seems like it creates mucus, and then that mucus can clog the villi or the microvilli in the small intestine and change absorption, and then and also create inflammation. So so those seem to be the worst foods. Repairing the gut seems to be a necessary thing. I mean, this is sometimes the job of glutamine. We can use low-level laser therapy, and that's been really helpful for me for changing the way my gut works, restoring the normal microbiome. So a lot of people have had a lot of courses of antibiotics, or at least the people that I see, and so sometimes the main thing is restoring the balance of the microbiome. So yeah, fixing guts or gastrointestinal symptoms are a big part of what it takes to heal the brain. The next thing that a lot of people don't necessarily realize is that or that don't necessarily address is the proper rehabilitation of the injury itself. So when it comes to the whole so the brain injury itself, I mean, this is more often than not, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. Like the brain is, say the gut's inflamed already, or there are other injuries that have kind of weakened your brain's capacity to heal or do what it needs to do, respond metabolically to what's going on, metabolically or structurally. So so usually it's like the traumatic brain injury is like the final thing that puts people over the edge, and then they don't necessarily recover. So so basically when there's a trauma like that supersedes the brain's ability to handle it, things can shut down, and a lot of times this happens in the way that in the cranial nerves, basically. So so the cranial nerves are responsible for our ability to interact with our world through smell, sound, touch. Well, I guess touch mostly on the face, tongue, lips, taste, and then vision. So like all the nerves that coordinate the processing of those senses are cranial nerves, and they come out of the brainstem. And so depending on which part of the brain, again, is the weakest, so to speak, or the type of trauma that happens, certain cranial nerves can turn off, and they don't always necessarily turn back on. So doing proper rehab, one of the best ways that I've seen is to ask the nerves to do their work. So say snap a certain distance from somebody's ears, or do some visual tracking, and then identify like what hurts, what doesn't function well, like is there a discrepancy side to side, and then we can use low-level laser therapy or low-level light therapy to upregulate the functions of the nerves that aren't working. And so that can bring people's bring things back online so that people can interact with their world more efficiently or at all. The other thing that happens with an injury is that sometimes things aren't necessarily turned fully off, but the brain has to use a lot of energy to run those systems. So for example, like if we have so vision, for example, like visual tracking is a common thing that people have difficulty with after a traumatic brain injury. So say your brain has to use so much energy to move your eyes that it doesn't really have much energy for other things. What the brain can decide to do, or I don't know who makes that decision necessarily, but at a certain point, if moving your eyes is your body has no energy to do anything else other than move your eyes, your body can conserve energy by paralyzing those things, and so you're like certain muscles just won't work, and so people in this case, instead of being able to go like to the left, they'll have to end up turning their head to look in that direction. So that's one of those things that can happen. Other injuries though that can kind of weaken the nervous system or decrease the bandwidth what your nervous system has to work with. One is like scars and bone breaks. So like the brain has a certain map. It's a proprioceptive map of what the body is doing, and if that's disrupted through scar tissue or breaks, like bone breaks or tattoos, piercings sometimes do this, like a spot where there's been an infection and like inflammation of tissue. These things, we call them interference fields because they interfere with the body's normal sensory or motor processing of things that are going on in that area. So this is another big deal when it comes to getting better, improving neurological function, freeing up bandwidth for healing, is working on scars and breaks and physical trauma that hasn't necessarily had a chance to heal. And then the last one, the third part that I wanted to talk about is this idea of changing habits, beliefs, your story, your mindset. This one might sound kind of fluffy, but in my experience it's the most powerful because our beliefs about the world kind of shape how we see the world. They don't they really do. This is what quantum physics tells us anyway. So on the physiological side, say you have a certain belief or worldview, mindset that say it is like the world is unsafe, and a lot of people are in some way, and a lot of people who have had head injuries are there, like they're kind of more how do you say, like set to, like they're more vigilant, they're more hyper vigilant, and so they're looking out more like for danger, more so than people who haven't been traumatized in like a neurological way. So yeah, I mean, if a lot of your emotion is based in fear and like keeping yourself safe, this can push the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, the fight or flight branch, and so and then it just shuts down healing. So there's a whole, in the autonomic nervous system, there's sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight, and then the autonomic nervous system, that's branch of the nervous system that's responsible for healing and resting and digesting, is the parasympathetic nervous system. And so yeah, when it basically, like fear-based emotions, trauma, beliefs, these can all put people in sympathetic dominance, and then they just can't heal. So that's that. So yeah, changing your mind and calibrating yourself for healing instead of like just surviving, if that makes sense, can be it's not that it can't be. I think that needs to happen at some level, and it's different for everyone. I mean, some people are more resilient when it comes to this stuff, but most everyone, when they have a traumatic brain injury, the reason they don't get better is that it goes beyond what their body can handle in that moment, and we do need to clean up that trauma neurologically and with people's beliefs. So yeah, so basically, so telling a different story when it comes to your health is what I wanted to reiterate as the third thing that really helps people to heal. And so no matter what you've been told about what is possible when it comes to healing, or your past beliefs, or what your family tells you, or whatever, you can be better. And I'm saying that because I've done it myself. And so if I can do it, so can you. So if any of this has resonated with you, or if you want to share your own story, or if you have any questions, please leave a comment below. And thanks for listening.